Welcome back, everybody. Now we're going to talk about white blood cells, leukocytes. White blood cells are not as common as red blood cells, which we've talked about. They only comprise less than 1% of our entire blood, if you remember that hematocrit, and if you remember the centrifuge. 45% of our blood is red blood cells, 55% or close to 55% of our blood is plasma. So it's just this little tiny amount that makes up all of our white blood cells as well as our platelets. But they have a huge function. Even though there's a very few numbers, they have a monstrous function. They protect us against foreign invaders, microorganisms that try to cause disease. And so this is a beautiful macrophage fighting against bacteria. So leukocytes differ from erythrocytes in that they contain a nucleus, they contain organelles, which means they can not only fight against pathogens, but they can fix damage that has been caused to them. They are motile and they're flexible. They can move through blood vessels, through the cells, and get into our tissues. So the process of moving through the cells of the blood is known as diapedesis. And this is what occurs when white blood cells move to the site of damage and squeeze across the membrane so that they can fight at the tissue level in those tissues. Typically, they're going to be attracted to some chemicals being released either by other body cells or by the potential pathogen itself. So there are different types of white blood cells. Classifying them, we can call them either granulocytes or agranulocytes. Your granulocytes have little granules inside, and when we talk about granulocytes, I usually refer to them as the phils because they all end in phil. So we have a neutrophil, eosinophil, and basophil. Agranulocytes have no granules. Well, they do, but they're so small that we don't tend to see them. And these are our lymphocytes and monocytes. So neutrophils. These are your neutrophils. They have kind of an S or a U-shaped nucleus. They're kind of a unique nucleus. These are the most common of all of our white blood cells. They're the first responders to most invasions. Their granules are very, very light. Eosinophils, boom, very large, but they make up a very small proportion of all of our white blood cells. They have larger granules, and they have a bilobed nucleus. So it almost looks like a nucleus with a little tiny extension attached to another nucleus. But it's one nucleus that has an extension attaching it. And then we have our basophils. These are the least common of all of our white blood cells. And the basophils, their nucleus is really hard to see. Their nucleus tends to look S-shaped. You can hardly tell, though, because of all of the granules inside that basically cover the entire internal region. Eosinophils and basophils become more common during allergic reactions. Eosinophils also become more common during parasitic infections, so worm infections. Basophils, typically you're talking about severe allergens. Neutrophils are the first responders. They are phagocytes. They release chemicals that can cause damage to the cells. And they're most likely to attack bacteria. Eosinophils, they increase in number in parasitic infections as well as in allergies. They can also they also can use phagocytosis. They secrete chemicals that decrease allergic responses. They release enzymes that can kill worms in our digestive tract. And then basophils. These are our major responders to allergic reactions. They secrete two chemicals, histamine and heparin. Histamine is released in response to speeding up blood flow to an area, so it causes swelling. And heparin is an anticoagulant that helps allow blood to move at a faster rate. Our agranulocytes are the lymphocytes and monocytes. Lymphocytes are the second most common of all of our blood cells, and then monocytes. Lymphocytes have a very large nucleus that takes up almost the entire cytoplasm. And our lymphocytes are our specific responders to pathogenic attack. Monocytes, these are the largest of our white blood cells. They have a large nucleus, not as large as the lymphocyte for the size. When monocytes become activated, they are converted into macrophages, and they are specialist phagocytes. So here are lymphocytes. These typically reside in lymphatic organs. And there are three types of lymphocytes that we'll talk a lot more about in Chapter 22. We have T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes. And then we have natural killer cells. Natural killer cells are not specific defenders, but they do defend our body against a lot of potential attacks. Monocytes can be found within our body tissues as fixed, or they can move from one place to another place. These are known as wandering monocytes. But they convert into macrophages, and when they do this, they become very specialized at what they do, and they're basically the cleanup crew. They can phagocytize pathogens just like neutrophils can, but they do a much better job, and they can do it for a lot longer. They also become antigen-presenting cells, which means they can present a pathogen on the surface of their cell to activate immune responses. Associated with white blood cells, we have leukopenia. Leukopenia is a reduced number of leukocytes, and if you have too few leukocytes, then you're more prone to infections. Leukocytosis, elevated number of leukocytes, and typically this is associated with having an infection or to having just gotten over an infection. Lymphocytosis is an increased number of lymphocytes, typically associated with some type of infection, either viral or chronic bacterial infection. But it also can be seen in certain cancers. Lymphocytopenia, decreased number of lymphocytes, and this is going to reduce your immune system. This can be caused by certain viruses or cancers in your system. So one of your clinical views is leukemia, and this is cancer of the stem cells that produce lymphocytes or leukocytes. Say leukocytes in general. There are two types. We have myeloid leukemia, which is uncontrolled granulocyte growth, and then lymphoid leukemia, uncontrolled lymphocyte or monocyte production. So acute leukemias, and over here I just have two different textbook pictures to show what a normal blood cell slide would look like. This is what a normal blood smear would look like. Here is leukemia. So you have all these very large white blood cells, and this would be a lymphoid leukemia because you have these super large nuclei and these U-shaped nuclei, and the white blood or the red blood cells are becoming very uncommon, whereas up here red blood cells are the most common. In acute leukemias, you see the leukemia appear and progress very rapidly. It can be very deadly, and without treatment, you'll likely die within months. With treatment, you can potentially fight off the infection if you catch it early enough. Chronic leukemia is a slower growing leukemia that sometimes can go undetected for many, many months. Typically, the survival time in chronic leukemia is much longer than in acute leukemias, but again, you have to start the treatment to be able to fight the infection. The last the last of our blood cells are called platelets. And platelets are tiny pieces of a megakaryocyte. Platelets comprise a very small amount of all of our blood. They're in that less than 1% region. And they typically stay in our system for about a week to a week and a half. We're going to stop here, and I'll finish this up in our last video for Chapter 18, okay? Have a wonderful day. Bye.